All right, welcome to part 2 of It's Not Cancer. If you missed part 1, you probably want to go back and watch that to catch up. Rolling straight into it, at this point, a medical professional has said to me they believe, based on their experience, that this is probably bone cancer. However, we don't actually know. There's no way to know. X-rays don't do it, nothing. We actually need to biopsy that before we actually have a final answer. So I'll lay out all of the options that the doctor explained to me in a second, but before we do that, just like with anything, it might be worthwhile to kind of go get a second opinion and have another chat about it. So I just want to kind of talk through that experience because part of going to get the second opinion and all that stuff extends out the length of time before we finally get into this. And then I'm going to go back and revisit exactly how things were explained to me by eventually who became my actual doctor. So at this point, there's a couple of things that are going on. I'm scheduling appointments to go get a second opinion. Each doctor I talked to, I had a series of questions I was asking. As I mentioned before, my doctor went through and spent over an hour with me answering all the stuff. One of the questions that I asked the doctor, and this is a tricky one, okay? One of the questions I asked was, if it was you, who would you want to do this procedure? And there's part of me that wants the doctor to be so confident that they say, me, like it needs to be me. I want it, like I want that amount of ego, right? But there's also part of me that wants this not to be an ego thing as well, to just like with anything, they can recognize good talent and so on. And so I asked each of the doctors that, and the second person I was going to go see was recommended by a couple friends of ours and things like that. Now, the difference in experience between the first doctor and the second doctor was pretty dramatic. When I went to the second doctor, went down through this crazy dungeon dark maze, get to the office, we get there, and I'm not going to belabor this a lot, but I believe completely capable, talented doctor, etc. But when we sat down to have the conversation, a couple of things became very evident to me as far as some of the things that my eventual doctor spoke of. This conversation was very clinical with the second doctor, and it was basically like they looked at it. Their guess was it was probably a stage one bone cancer, which obviously a huge part of me really wanted to be true, because I was already in the 3 world right now, and I didn't want to be there. And after they said that, it was basically like, we won't know anything until we get a biopsy. Well, I still had my list of questions. And so I wanted to go through that list of questions. And they said, go ahead, fire away. And as I fired away, it was funny because it felt like this good cop, bad cop thing. Their little resident minion person, who's not really a minion, but that's the way it kind of went. I would ask a question, and eventually I think I only got to about the 3rd question before it just became, well, she was like, well, we might as well not waste our time. We're not going to know anything until we get the biopsy, and, there's just no point in talking anymore. And I'm not going to lie, like, in my mind, I was thinking, dude, I can get a biopsy. Right? I'm not here because, you get a biopsy and tell me what the biopsy says. I'm here because I'm excited about your medical experience to help me through all of this. Not just, we might as well not talk. We just wait till the biopsy and then we'll know what we're going to do. There's no point in wasting time. And so I didn't even have to think twice. Like I hit a home run with the first doctor I talked to. And so I walked out of the second opinion, and I was like, nope, that's not my doctor. No, very talented doctor, all those kinds of things, just not the experience that I was going to need for potentially a lifetime of this. Now, the interesting thing was when I asked that doctor that same question, who would you go see? He again said himself, of course, But then he actually mentioned the name of the first person I was working with. So that was just icing on the cake. At this point, I have found my doctor. I am stoked. Now, before we get into exactly what was so amazing about the way my doctor laid things out, what my options are going to be, I want to talk quickly about the extra amount of time this is taking. So this is taking more time, and I'm still in a place where I still don't know, and so I'm living in this world where every day I wake up and it is a psychological battle, right? And the interesting thing about this was I found that mornings were very tough. By the time there's something about it. By the time I got to the end of the day, I was pretty good. I felt generally good. It was going to be what it was going to be, and I could play video games with my brother, and everything was fine. But what was interesting was I was explaining this to my brother, and he said something very interesting to me. And he basically said it's all about endorphins and serotonin and everything like that. And he said, try working out in the morning. Like first thing when you get up, do a really hard workout. Run, just exhaust yourself, like build up all that stuff. And so a tip that helped me, it didn't make it perfect. Mornings were still tough for some reason, but going and working out hard first thing in the morning definitely helped me get through the initial part of the day that seemed for some reason to be the toughest part psychologically. As the day went on, everything kind of picked up. So a tip that worked for me, if you're going through anything like this, was working out hard in the morning, doing something like that. It made a really big difference for me. Now, let's go back to what the playing field looks like. What does the battlefield look like based on what I understood? And now this is where we get back into the caveats. Again, I am not a medically trained professional. Talk to your doctors. This is only my interpretation of what was explained to me. And so it could be a wrong interpretation, but it's what I understood at the time, and that's what's important here. Okay, so how did the doctor lay this out for me, and what was amazing about the layout? First off, as I mentioned, it was a over an hour conversation, and basically what we were looking at is we went through all the scenarios. Okay, so there's everything from benign, like you don't really have cancer. It's like a benign tumor or mass or whatever, and not gonna lie, there's still the optimist in me that is hoping that is the case. Then there's everything stage 1 through 4, and then beyond. Now, the beyond part is scary. So let's just talk about each of these specifically. Depending on where you look at the numbers, the survivability past 5 years, depending on which stage you're in, dramatically goes up the lower the stage. It makes sense. So with something like bone cancer, at stage 1, the percentages are pretty high, 80+%, depending on what site you look on, depending if you catch it even earlier. I've even seen numbers as high as 90. And then as you go to 2, 3, once you get to 4, depending on how far along it is, the numbers drop down to, I saw as low as 20 and 30%. So, and again, this is all assuming that it was bone cancer. Now, what's beyond stage 4 and what's scary about stage 4, and there's a whole lot of conversations about dedifferentiated cells and everything like that. But the thing that's scary beyond stage 4 is not stage 4 bone cancer. It's if the cancer has moved out of the bone and metastasized to probably most likely my lungs. Because generally, apparently, as I understood it, that's where this goes first. So we have benign all the way to scary, lung spreading throughout the body stuff. So what does this battlefield look like? What are we going to do? So first thing we're going to do, again, this is as I understood it, first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a CT scan of the lungs. We're going to take a look at my lungs right away. And to do that, because we want to take a look and make sure that it hasn't moved into my lungs. So that's one of our first stops, getting a CT scan of the lungs. Then, depending on that, we're going to be doing a biopsy because we actually need to find out what's inside. hold on, wait a minute. I have a question about the biopsy. In order to do a biopsy, you're going to punch a hole in my bone. And when you punch a hole in my bone, this is one of my first questions, aren't you popping the balloon? Isn't cancer going to come out into my blood when you do that? Apparently that was a good question. And apparently the percentages show, like in the thousands of times this has been done, it's never been a factor. All right, I'm good with that answer. That's great. I can roll with that. So we've got the bone. So we got the CT scan and we have a biopsy coming. Now, what is this like? What are my options here? All right, and the way the options were laid out to me are pretty much as follows. There's a procedure that's called, and I'm going to say this wrong, and I actually got in trouble at one point for using medical terms because I was using them wrong. So I believe it's called a curette, C-U-R-E-T-T. I'm not great at spelling, but anyways, I'm going to call that the ice cream scoop, because for the way that works is what they do is they basically go into the bone and they scoop out the cancer with an ice cream scooper, effectively. It's not really an ice cream scooper, but you get the general idea. And the whole point is what they're doing is they're just kind of scooping out the cancer cells, getting rid of them, and then they basically leave a hollow bone and they put, like, I believe they put a bone graft and stuff in there and things like that. Now, the problem with that one is, and let me rephrase it. I don't know if it's a problem. The thing that worried me personally about that one is you're in there, you're scooping out all this cancer, you're hoping you don't drop any as you do it, and you think you got it all. So that's kind of the way I articulated it back to the doctor. He's like, well understood, very good concerns. And basically, the way I understood what he said back to me was, if I was a professional athlete or my life depended on my arm working, it might be worthwhile to do that one. And with that one, then what you keep, the advantage of that is you keep all of your own bone. It eventually hopefully grows back, and all of your attachments. And I believe, I'm not sure if it's full range of motion. I kind of stopped worrying about this option at this point because I kind of realized that wasn't going to be right for me. And so the ice cream scoop thing, the downside of it is, other than, you're potentially dropping cancer and stuff like that, is if you don't get it all and it comes back, then you have to go back in and do all of this again. And remember, the only thing I cared about was I'd like to stick around long enough to, see Rascal graduate, let alone, Christmas and all that stuff. So Christmas is looking fine at this point, by the way. But so in my mind, no, I'm way more Spartan than that. I'm still at potentially cutting the whole arm off in my head. But option one is the curette, where they're gonna ice cream scoop that out. Option two is just a straight ahead humerus implant. Okay, so how does that work? Well, basically they go in and they saw off part of your bone and then they replace it with just a straight implant. Now, what is the advantage of the straight implant? The advantage of the straight implant is that you don't have any your dislocation potential is still there, but if your shoulder dislocates, you can pop it back in, like Lethal Weapon style. You just pop it back in. It's not a surgical fix. And so that's a pretty big advantage, as I understood it. Now, the disadvantage, and this is a pretty big disadvantage of option two, is you will never lift your arm past 30 degrees. So basically, everybody remembers the 30, 60, 90 triangles. That's about 30 degrees, maybe somewhere in there. So I'll never get my arm past 30 degrees. That's a pretty big disadvantage. That's option two. Now, I may not have a choice. Option two may be my only choice, and I'll explain why in a second. Option three is a total reverse shoulder. This is a new thing, relatively new, because remember, keep in mind, the doctor had said, 7 years ago, none of these may have even been an option. But anyways, option two is, and by the way, when I said the doctor said that, what I mean is that's what I interpreted from the doctor. So option three, total reverse shoulder. Basically what they do, and this one's kind of wild, Let me see if I can show you. Okay, so basically what I've got is, this is the only one I could find a picture of. The others they're hard to find, but what this does is this actually reverses the way the shoulder works. Typically your shoulder, if you look at anatomy, it has at the end of the humerus is the ball joint that rotates around. Where in this case, what they do is they actually screw the ball joint into your scapula, and then the socket is actually at the end of your humerus, and that all gets put in. Now, which is why it's called a reverse shoulder, because it's the reverse of what the normal shoulder looks and works like. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of option 3, our reverse shoulder? So our first advantage is with a reverse shoulder, you have the potential to potentially touch, depending on how you're reading, you may touch the back of your head again one day with the total reverse shoulder. Because basically what they do is they're able to kind of like get everything kind of reattached in a way that you potentially have that ability. Now, mine's going to be a little bit more entertaining because they're going to have to cut a whole lot more of the humerus than you saw in that picture. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute, or maybe even in a later video. For now, let's just continue on. Advantage, I will have a much greater range of motion out of my shoulder in the end. Disadvantage, there is a much greater risk of dislocation. The greater risk of the dislocation, though, isn't just, it gets dislocated. You can't just lethal weapon the thing back in. By the way, if you haven't seen Lethal Weapon, basically he spent all his time popping his shoulder back in a joint. My point is, if you have a dislocated shoulder, you can't just bash your shoulder against a wall and put it back in place with a total reverse shoulder, because it's mechanical. So if you dislocate your shoulder, you have to go in for a surgical fix. Now, the other thing about it is you're forever weight limited. So I would never be able to lift more than 50 pounds below the waist or 25 pounds above the waist. I don't think I totally understood all of what that meant until later, but we'll get into that in a second. And then the final thing is, this may not even be an option. And the reason that this may not be an option is because in order for this to work, what they need to do is they need to take, again, this is how I understood it, they need to repurpose my axillary nerve, I believe it's called, and they're going to connect that up. They're going to take my deltoid and set it up to do the work of 3 different muscles and connect in my axillary nerve and rewire, and then I have to relearn how to use my shoulder again. So that's option 3. Option 4 is shark bait, right? We basically take the whole arm. Now, I say that lightly only because mentally I had already decided that I was okay with that. And even today, if I had to, I would still be okay with that. And there's actually some interesting things about the losing the whole arm, the shark bait option, if you will, where there's a lot of like potential upside to that as well, which I'll talk about later. But anyways, those are the 4 options, and keep in mind the losing the whole arm was like less than 5% based on experience and things like that. So that wasn't really one that we were worried about, but it was on the table. And there are some things later on where I'm like, I definitely thought, sometimes there were definitely thoughts that crossed my mind as far as like, it might have been better just to do that. So, and I'll get to that later. So those are our 4 options, right? The ice cream scoop, straight implant, total reverse shoulder, or shark bait. We just take the whole arm. Now, the explanation doesn't stop there. That's what the battlefield looks like as far as the actual arm itself. The thing that was great about my overall experience with the doctor, not only is all this being explained to me, but then there's all of the follow-up that happens afterwards. And there was just a lot of just good advice and thought process that went into this. So what's going to happen is Once we get the CT scan, we figure out what's going on in the lungs. Then we're going to get the biopsy. At that point, they don't just go in. What happens is the doctor takes my case and goes before a board. And I can't remember how many people are on the board, but basically presents my case to a board. Now, as much confidence as I have in my doctor, what I appreciated was the fact that there was this kind of review process in place, and that they present the case, why they're doing it, and other professionals will chime in and things like that. In my mind, that sounds like just a very healthy feedback loop and way of doing things. So I'm really as excited as you can be about something like this. Honestly, I'm feeling really at ease with the way they're doing things here. And so they go before the board based on what the board says, then they move forward. Now, the other thing that the doctor said that I thought was also very, very important was, this is a lifelong relationship. And once you hop on the cancer train, it's not like you just get off. Like, I'm basically going to be watching for years at this point. And so he basically said, you need to be comfortable. We're going to be working together for a very long time. And even beyond that, one of the things that he said that resonated with me very, very well is, if we have a discussion, we talk about it, and he recommends, let's just say that he recommended a full amputation. And then fast forward, I find out about some other procedure or some other doctor, and I'm sitting there second guessing what my doctor said. That is not going to feel good. So whatever you decide, what he said to me is, whatever you decide, make sure you're on board 100%, because when we make these decisions, you need to be at ease with them, because we're talking about the rest of your life. Which was just amazing. Now, I ended up in even more, like I was 120% on board by the time that was all said. By the time we'd finished all of our discussions and everything like that. So I was very comfortable with that decision, with the decisions that we were going to make and so on. Now, the other big thing that the doctor said that I just thought was amazing was, he said, we're actually going to bring in a second doctor to do the actual implant part of it. And I was a little confused at first. And basically the general gist of what it was is, as confident as he was, he said, I'm an oncologist. I work on the cancer part. Who would you rather have doing the implant? Would you rather have the oncologist who that's not their specialty, or would you rather have the sports orthopedist who does, 100 of these? The guy who does 2 or the person who does 100? I was like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Again, another huge win, another huge kudos for this doc. Like he's just checking all the boxes, man. So anyways, the way that it looks now is, we have our 4 options. We have our upcoming CT scan. We have our biopsy. And then we have a whole lot of just quality psychological advice and confidence and things like that. I have a second doctor who's potentially going to be coming in to do the actual sports implant part of it, because that's their specialty. So now I have a team that's working on me. Just all of this was explained in the first visit. That is such a dramatically different experience than when I went to talk to other doctors. So I knew, I was like 100% confident. I thought after the first visit, dude, after talking to a few other doctors, I was like 150, 200% confident that I had lucked out and found the right doctor. And so that was an amazing amount of peace of mind to have going into this. So we know what the battlefield looks like. Let's start knocking these things out. So I went and got my CT scan of my lungs. And this was one of the big first, good news bits was when we did the bone survey and I didn't see it anywhere else. This was one that honestly I was holding my breath for, because If it had metastasized to my lungs, this was another, it's just a whole other level. So I went in and got the CT scan, and another just doctor, so amazing, called me 8 o'clock the next morning from his cell phone while he was on his way to surgery, says, basically, I don't have time to talk right now, but I know you're on pins and needles. We got your results back on your CT scan. It looks great. And what he didn't want me to do is he didn't want me to hop in and look at the comments, because in the comments it said, there's all kinds of stuff. There's little bits in the lungs and things like that. He didn't want me freaking out. Later on, when I talked to him about it, he basically said, you live in Los Angeles. There's stuff in the air. Almost everybody has something in their lungs. Everything that we're seeing in your CT scan, it's stable. It's not a concern. We'll just monitor it over time to make sure, but your CT scan looks great. That was a good day. So now I'm running, I'm exercising, I'm feeling better and better. Still don't know if we have bone cancer, but we know that whatever it is has not moved to my lungs, which is fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about the biopsy before we wrap up part 2. Dude, the biopsy was wild. So the way the biopsy works is they basically, while you're awake, they're doing a live CT scan. The doctor sits down with the person who kind of like specializes in looking at the cancer cells and things like that. They decide where in your bone is the best place, the worst possible place, so they can take a sample from there so they can get hopefully the best worst case scenario is the idea. And what they do is you basically go in there, and while you're awake, you're sitting in the CT scan machine, and they use the CT scan machine to drive, like basically punch a hole through your bone into the section that they want to take the sample from so that they can get the biopsy they want. And honestly, the team was amazing. They were awesome. In my mind, I'm like, wait, I'm gonna be awake when you punch a hole in my bone. but dude, the team was amazing. The anesthesiologist, they explained everything that was happening. They told me what it was gonna be like. Yes, you're going to be awake. You're not actually gonna feel it. You are going to feel like a jolt, like when it actually goes through, but you're not going to feel pain. And so I did. I went in for a biopsy where I was awake, and they punched a hole in my bone, and they took it. I didn't feel any pain. It was weird. I'm not gonna lie. It was weird because I did feel the punch into the bone, but as promised, it didn't actually hurt. A medical person could probably explain to you why you're awake for this procedure, but overall, it was awesome. And actually, we had a lot of fun. All of the support staff, the MRI specialist or the CT scan specialist, everybody, dude, it was a good time. Honestly, it was kind of crazy. It was actually a good time. There's some very cool people who took care of me, and we got a biopsy done. And I am happy to say that, and wrap up this part 2 video, the biopsy came back as stage 1. So let that settle, man. Stage 1. Like, mentally in my mind, I was thinking 2 or 3. The doctor was guessing 2 or 3. And, please not 4. But, it came back as stage 1. Now, don't get excited. You got bone cancer, right? It's like, hold on a second. Like, I'm excited. I have bone cancer, right? But I have stage 1 bone cancer. And I'm still not allowed to be excited yet because there's a whole lot of it in there. And before we can confirm that it's all stage 1 or 3 or 4, 2, no 4. No, just say no to 4. Stage 2, 3, or 1, whatever it is, we're going to eventually one day send the whole bone off to get checked. But for right now, at this point in time, my percentages past 5 years just went up. We're talking 80+% in most cases. That's a huge day. That was a good day. So that wraps up part 2 of It's Not Cancer. You do have bone cancer. And, but fortunately in this case, it is stage 1. And in our next video, what I'll do is I'll start covering, what it looked like going through the surgery that's coming, explaining all of those things. And all of this, again, supported my friends, working out every morning. Huge thanks for helping me find this doctor. It was good. It was good. This was a good day. Sweet. All right, more to come.